Okay, last video for this year. And this is linked to the scenarios I painted at the start. I can't remember, what did I call them? The phases, wasn't it? There was the Malthusian phase, and there was the consumption phase. And then what was the last phase called? Oh, I can't remember. I can't remember my own book. Never mind. This is about that anyway. So first, just ticking off a few topics. Green consumerism, super tricky. Okay, we can't expect consumers to solve this. The key problem with green consumerism is like rebound. If you don't consume one thing, but your income is unchanged, you're going to consume something else instead. Or if you save, that is effectively investing, and what's the capital going to be invested in? Could be just as bad. We can't expect individual consumers to weigh up the environmental effects of their actions. I mean, of course, at an individual level, you can try, I try, but that should not be like a policy to hand over responsibility to consumers. We need consumers to elect politicians who enact laws which lead to external effects being internalized in the prices of goods in borderline cases, and B, that lead to highly damaging or unnecessary practices being banned in black and white cases. Like if you know that lead in petrol is giving our kids brain damage, you don't say, oh, pay this tax and you can still put lead in your petrol, right? Similarly, you don't let people have old-fashioned incandescent light bulbs that you know produce 95 or 99% heat and 1% light per energy input, when you can have light bulbs that produce 90% heat or even 80% heat and 20% light. Okay. But now we're going to get to this last topic, which I'm going to talk about, which is conspicuous consumption. So we're going to talk a bit about why we keep making these choices to, for instance, the flying stuff. But there's a bigger question, which is actually why we keep working so hard. We don't need to work so hard, do we? Like, I've been working like crazy the last few weeks. But in terms of getting enough to live on, you know, I could earn enough to live on. Well, I could retire today. Why do I keep working so hard? Why don't I have a bit more fun? You know, and I talk about this with my wife. My sister's like, she's 6 years older than me. She retired about 4 years ago. So maybe, maybe in a couple of years, it could happen. Conspicuous consumption. What is conspicuous consumption and why might it be a problem? So conspicuous consumption, you can Google it. The term comes from a guy called Torsten Veblen, 100 years ago in the US. And he sort of basically said, look, why are we consuming all this stuff? It's basically to show off. We're creating like identities for ourselves through what we buy. Okay, and this is blatantly true, right? When we buy the clothes we buy, the haircuts, the nose jobs, etc., the cars we choose, the holidays we go on, it's all about building our identity and showing off our identity to others. Okay, we spend an immense amount of our time doing this. Okay, and I guess our choice of work is also, it's partly about getting the money to then be able to buy the goods that build our identities, but it's also part of our identities, of course, just the fact that we work. And that's maybe why I work so hard, because I'm not too bothered about the money, to be honest. Why might it be a problem? Well, this is where it gets interesting, because if I like sort of leisure and I like status. So let's call this whole identity thing. Let's imagine we're in a sort of competition for status. Okay. So I like having fun and I like having status. And I like having enough to eat and so on. I like having stuff as well to an extent for its own sake. But then the status, the more I work, the less fun I can have. So that's just bad, full stop. The more I work, the more stuff I can have. That's great to the extent that I actually want stuff for its own sake. The more I work, the more status I can have. But that's a problem because the more status I have, the less status other people have. Okay, because status is a zero-sum game. Okay, playing that status game, it's zero-sum. But the thing is, we're all in the same game, so we all end up working too much to try to get status compared to others. Okay, and of course we don't have to think about this in a conscious way. Oh, you know, I want to have a nicer shirt than whatever, or oh, you know, nice hairstyle, got to get that, or nice coat, or you know, nice car. We're comparing ourselves to other people the whole time, right? And this is motivating us to do stuff to match them. There's so much evidence for this, okay, as well as just, I hope, through introspection, you can see this. So the thing is, that's a zero-sum game. So maybe we're all sacrificing leisure and spending too much time working to try to get ahead in the game. But of course, no one ends up getting ahead. Or if we, on average, we don't get ahead, we all just end up working like crazy and not having any leisure time. And of course, the spin-off from this is that we have loads more money and loads more production and we trash the environment. Okay, so if we could all coordinate and agree to work less, not only would the environment be much better, but we'd all be happier as well because we'd have more free time. Okay, so it's a coordination problem to slow down the rat race, if you like. This is one way of looking at it. This might sound kind of extreme, but if you think about, this is really a mistake, I think, but whatever. Oh, maybe some of you recognize that. Here we are, the little rats in Uppsala racing along. And then there's this pond, isn't there? And then there's the other side. I can't draw that, sorry. Here, over here in North America, the US, they're working way harder than we are. Okay. And they are using far more energy, environmental, natural resources, etc., emitting far more carbon dioxide, etc. Is this because of difference in government policy? Almost certainly. Okay. Here we have a lot of policies that dampen labor supply. We have basically coordinated and elected governments that choose policies that help us chill out. Okay. We have a lot of labor force participation, which is awesome. So we have, for instance, heavily subsidized childcare and so on, because we have this idea that everyone should participate in the labor force. But when you're actually there, we don't work much, right? We have a fairly short working week. We have plenty of holiday days throughout the year, plus we have long holidays, right? Over here, there's like 2 weeks holiday a year is pretty much standard, and loads of people never really take their holiday. We had some friends over. My wife's daughter was over in the US for a year staying with a family. They came over to visit us. They were really nice people from Nebraska, out in the sticks. And Dallas, he said, what was it? He said, G, or, no, I don't think he said G actually, but he said, oh, it's doing nothing. It's exhausting. He was like, he wasn't used to being on holiday. He'd never really been on holiday, I don't think. Anyway, so there are big differences between countries in the extent to which we are actually working. And connected with that, the extent to the environmental damage we're causing. Maybe we should have even stronger policies to actually chill out more, have more holiday, shorter working week, and so on. Keynes, actually, the great economist of the first half mainly of the 20th century, wrote about this. He was like, look, in 100 years time, by 2030, we're not going to need to work. He was like, oh, we'll be working like 15-hour weeks tops. We won't even need to work that much, but we'll keep doing it because of the status thing. And he was right, we don't need to work more than a few hours a week. And he was right that we'll keep working because of the status thing, but he got the numbers wrong, yeah. So this is the numbers. And as we got richer, so back in Keynes's day and earlier, so this is for the G7, I should have, if I'd had time, I would have redone the scale so you could actually see the hours per week. But it's log scale, so these are growth rates. And basically, what we see is going back, what are the dates here? Going back 70 odd years, we're working like a lot more hours per week. So what's that? 7.3, 7.1. Oh, I'm not sure. We're working a lot more anyway. And through the 60s, 50s, 60s, some of the 70s, the amount we were working has gone down. And this is, yeah, we're getting richer. We don't need to work as much anymore. Let's just chill out more. But then this has leveled out. So we seem to have like bottomed out. And it's like, nah. My idea is, this is research I'm doing at the moment, is that here we're motivated by the need to get enough to eat and the need to have, you know, a warm house and so on. But here we're motivated by the competition for status. And as that never changes, we never get higher status, then that's why the labor supply is leveled out. We can build a model for this. Guess what? It's a CES function. And like I said, this is kind of for fun and to give you some perspectives. I'm not going to examine you on this. But we'll have a quick look at this model. Okay, so what have we got? We've got utility of some household is a function of the consumption of that household plus the leisure plus the environmental quality. And we've got some parameters, but I'm going to ignore those. And then here I've got epsilon minus 1 over epsilon. So a slightly different notation than before. So this would have been epsilon before. Now I'm calling it epsilon minus 1 over epsilon. So now if epsilon is infinity, then this is 1, isn't it? And epsilon is minus infinity. Sorry, and if epsilon is 0, then this is minus infinity. So epsilon is in the interval 0 to infinity, and it's actually the elasticity of substitution. So epsilon is the elasticity of substitution when you write it this way. Okay. And so we get utility from consumption, leisure, and environmental quality. But all else equal, the more we want to consume, we have to work, so the less leisure we get. And of course, there's equations for this in the model. And the more we consume, the more we produce, and the more environmental damages there are going to be. And there's a productivity factor, A, which is going up exogenously, which gives us more production per hour. And efficiency also goes up. Okay. I'm just thinking what else I need to tell you about this model. Yeah, and there's one more important thing, which is that there's also some baseline consumption that we need. If we can't consume SI, the minimum, or S bar, sorry, the minimum consumption level, then we die. And C is defined as consumption over and above S bar. Okay, so what's going to happen in this economy as A rises? So when A is small enough, we basically have to work our butts off. We have to work as hard as we possibly can, and we can just get S bar. And this is the Malthusian phase, right? And if A goes up a bit in the Malthusian phase, then population will go up, and it'll keep us in this state where we have to work like crazy to keep it, have enough to live. Okay. But now assume that we've broken the link, the Malthusian economy, we've moved into the consumerist phase, and A keeps rising. So what's going to happen now? So now, if we keep consuming, we can consume more than S bar, so C gets positive. But L is still very low, and Q is high. Yeah, we've got plenty of environmental quality. We don't need to worry about that because we're hardly producing anything still. So we're hardly trashing the environment at all. So as we get richer, we're going to choose to raise C, but we're also going to choose to raise L at the expense of C. Yeah, because we want to keep both of these rising. They're both very close to zero initially when we're just surviving. As we get richer, we're going to choose some more consumption and some more leisure. And the rates at which we do that are going to depend on the parameters, yeah, or this parameter. This one is normalized to 1. Okay, so initially, as A rises, we're going to choose to work less, and we're going to choose to, we'll still be producing more, yeah. And that will drive environmental damages up as well. Let's call this emissions. Okay, Q is environmental quality, which is like 1 minus emissions. Okay, but then as A gets higher and higher, we're basically going to have huge amounts of consumption, and we're going to stop, like Keynes said, leisure is going to approach the full sort of 24 hours a day, even as this keeps growing. We're going to approach labor, we're going to approach like no work and still loads of consumption. And it turns out if we keep increasing efficiency, then yeah, we'll end up, sorry, because we're working less and less, this will actually end up go back down. Because we want all of these to be as high as they can be. Yeah? So we're going to, this is going to infinity. Leisure is going to go to like 24 hours a day, and we're going to set this back to the perfect, pristine environment. So this will be consumption, this will be emissions, and this will be labor. Okay. So this is kind of what Keynes thought would happen, except that, okay, yeah. but it's not what we see, right? If you look at the data, remember labor levels off up here. And these graphs are sort of plotted with some sticking in some real data for productivity, okay, sticking it and then parameterizing the model. Seeing if we can match the trends in labor supply and emissions, and we can't, okay, because in real data, emissions keep going up, the labor supply levels off. So why is this? Maybe it's because there's a fourth term in the utility function. We don't just get utility from consumption for its own sake, leisure, and environmental quality. Maybe we get utility from our own consumption of conspicuous goods relative to the average consumption of conspicuous goods. And then we have divided by chi. So we add that in here. Okay. If we do that, then initially this term is always 1 if we have a simple economy where everyone's the same, right? That up line, because everyone has the same status all the time. They make the same choices. And initially, this is like 0 and 0 when A is low, right? So this is like plenty. Oh, we got loads of status. We're going to just worry about getting a bit more free time and a bit more consumption. But when this is like 1,000 and this is, we've got loads of leisure, then it's like, oh, you get more and more motivated to work, not by wanting more goods for their own sake, but by wanting to have goods for the sake of comparison with others, for the sake of building your identity and whatever. This is what is going to motivate us to work. Okay. So for myself, for instance, I am not motivated to work by the need or the desire to have particular goods for their own sake. I'm motivated to work by totally other things. Okay. So initially, we're going to see the same trends, but then once this has got big, this kicks in and leads to labor supply leveling out, environmental damages carrying on, and consumption going up more steeply. Okay. So maybe this is what's happening in our economies. And if this is the case, this is a massive externality, right? It's a massive coordination problem. And we need governments to dampen our keenness to supply labor. We actually, the taxes, typically we talk about a trade-off, right? In high taxes. Taxes are good for things like equality, trygghet, Swedes love that. It's like there's not even a word for it really in English. How do you translate trygghet? It's like safety, security, but it's much more than that. It's the feeling of feeling safe. But bad because they discourage labor supply. So this is a classic idea in sort of welfare economics that we have this dilemma. But according to this model, actually, up to a point, taxes are good on both counts. Okay, they're actually helping us to chill out a bit more and getting us closer to what would be an optimal coordinated supply of labor that we would choose if we could all agree together. Okay, I think it's super interesting stuff. I don't know if you agree. I hope the editors agree when I submit this to a journal before too long. Yeah, and we can sort of fit data with this. Yeah. Okay. The above model shouldn't be taken too seriously. but it demonstrates that there may exist sound economic arguments for governments to discourage labor and encourage leisure, even in the absence of environmental damage. If international consumption externalities are important, then it's only rational for national governments to impose such policies if their neighbors do the same. Okay, if we compare ourselves to our neighbors, then it's like international externalities. So perhaps this is why European economies have collectively been able to hold down or even reduce working hours over recent decades, whereas the US has moved in the opposite direction. Okay, the working hours are a lot higher in the US, as I said, than here in most of Europe, or all of Europe, I think. Basically, there may be the odd exception. And of course, taxes tend to be a lot higher here than in the US. So we're dampening labor supply through our choice of policies, what our elected politicians are doing. Okay, I think this is the last slide. Yeah. Mainstream economics and radical alternatives. Mainstream economic mantra: get the prices right, get the prices right. We've discussed, for instance, taxes on flying contra subsidies to clean technology. First best, the regulator would simply correct all externalities by getting prices right. This might be both through, for instance, taxing emissions and subsidizing research. In reality, it may be hard to tax emissions because we don't want to push the firms abroad. It may be hard to know what the correct price of knowledge is. Then we need to understand more about the system to find the best policy. And we spend a lot of time trying to understand the system in this course. Yeah, that's what we've basically been doing. And in reality, externalities are all pervasive. Click on the link if you want a fun little story about all pervasive externalities. And maybe what I talked about just now, externalities are leading us to work too hard and consume and produce too much. If that's true, it's a big deal for economic policy. Okay, wow. So I hope you've enjoyed these videos. I don't know, it must be tough watching all these videos. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the videos, and I look forward to the next time we meet on Zoom. Thanks.